So what we're going to do today is we're going to go back and we're going to kind of recap what we did last week. And I know some of you weren't there. And then we're going to go into the next part of the reading, which some of you I know have done. And then we're going to actually kind of set the stage for the next class, which is going to be a more positive reading than what we're going to read here, thank the Lord, redemptive. And Christy's going to help us set the stage. Because you remember I said that last week that part of the ways to get us thinking in this class, we want to give Gomer a voice. And a lot of plays and other scripts and speculation has been written about Gomer, what caused her to be where she is. We don't have much in the scripture about her, but and so one of those plays that somebody is a devout Christian and a pretty learned Christian, a lady has done. And we're going to have we're just selecting a couple of 2 or 3 readings during the course of this class that'll be made. And Christy's going to do the reading toward the end of this class. She wanted me to say that is not typecasting. She's not an adulteress. She's not a promiscuous. No matter how you interpret this, she's not of a promiscuous spirit. And nor for a King James Version, she's not a lady of whoredom. Okay, none of those. But I went to look for somebody like that, and there were none to be seen in this church. And so I had to find somebody on the other side. So on your card you have this painting, and I told some of you last week I actually got a license to use this. I thought this is a fantastic abstract painting of Gomer in the middle. And we'll be talking about it later on in the classes, but you kind of see the darkness and the idolatry and the pagan worship and all of that to this side of her, and you see Hosea kind of pushing her on this side, and all the imagery with the butterflies, renewal of life, new hope, and everything, and the red dress, and just the look in her of exhaustion, despair. It's a fantastic painting, and I found it to be inspiring. So, we reference this. This is at the end of Hosea, and this is really what he wants us to understand through this, that who is discerning? Let them realize these things. Let them understand. The righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. He says this toward the end. We're reading it at the beginning. Going forward. Here's the outline of the classes on your cards. We're in week 2 right there. We're going to spend 4 classes on the first 3 chapters. You remember the first 3 chapters of Hosea's relationship with his wife, a living parable of his relationship with the wife. It parallels, and it also, you will find, it interrelates, particularly in this scripture, with God's relationship with Israel. And so the first 3 we deal kind of with the relationship, but you see allusions to Israel in this, particularly as he goes from the third person to the first person in today's lesson. But in the fourth chapter through the end of this, deals with God's relationship with Israel and their disobedience. But you're always thinking about this relationship when you're in it. And so they mix together. We're going to spend the last 2 classes on those last chapters. So Hosea, we talked about who he was. He's one of they're called the minor prophets. And they're minor why? Short. They didn't write much. Yeah, I think it was, I said this last week, Mark Twain wrote his sister and said, I don't have time to write you a long letter. A short letter, so I've written you a long letter. Yeah, you get it? Writing concise is hard. And Hosea is kind of a master of the language. He uses poetry and he uses abrupt changes that only a good author can do in his writing, and in sharp contrast. He evokes emotion, not just in the metaphor of marriage, but just in the way the sharpness of his language that people have seen here. He's one of the first recorded minor prophet, I believe. And he goes in chronological order. He may have known Amos. Amos a little bit older than him, but he may have known Amos. And he ends, may have overlapped, but ends when Isaiah starts. So you kind of get an idea of the timeline. And he's addressing the northern kingdom of Israel. You have Judah and the northern kingdom. That split occurred after the Solomon's successor. He speaks a little bit of Judah, but he's primarily talking to the northern kingdom. And it's during the reign of Jeroboam II. Jeroboam II was probably the most successful of the kings of the northern kingdom. He had a relatively long reign. The country had financial success, best we could take, economic success during the time after, but there are elements of rot in Israel that are going to portend its dissolution, ultimately being conquered and dissolved, and we talk about that. I think after Jeroboam II, I think his son succeeded him. He lasted 6 months. There might have been 6 other kings, and I think the majority of them were murdered by their successors. So you can get an idea of the political unrest that would occur. They were on the cusp of that during the time of his prophecy. This is a map kind of the political situations dominated by Assyria. Assyria is rising again in power, and it's threatening its neighbors. And we'll see one of the complaints, allegations of Hosea is that the northern kingdom is doing the wrong things in response to this threat. They're putting their hope in political alliances. And there's one time they had an alliance with Egypt. They shifted the alliance, and before it's all over with, they become essentially a vassal state of Assyria. And then there's a revolt to that, and the Syrians just wipe them out, and the northern kingdom's abolished. So that's a map. You can kind of see Assyria is not Syria, close to it, what we call modern day, but it's not Syria. And you can kind of see all the directions of conquest in that map itself. Okay, the characters. The main character is obviously God in this. Second is Hosea. We talked about what his name means, salvation. Gomer, to complete or fill up. Israel, there's debate what the name Israel means, but he retains God is one of the Hebrew interpretations of the name. And there are other names there that are referenced here for Israel. And is it Ephraim? Is that the right pronunciation? Okay. Which is another name for the northern kingdom of Israel. It's like, if you have a nickname for your spouse, that would be it. Samaria is the last capital of the northern kingdom. So we said before, if Vladimir Putin talks about the U.S., he may call it Washington. Okay, that's where the center of power and influence in Israel. The last character is you and I. We're in every one of these pages in the book. We are Gomer, and in many ways we are Israel. And the author wants us to see ourselves in these pages. So the other names, Jezreel, that's one of the sons that we're going to quickly get to that we talked about last week. The first son of Gomer, God sows or scatters. Lo Ruhamah, for lack of a better pronunciation, not pitied, not loved. Did anybody have arguments with your spouse over the name of your children? You did? We're still having arguments. You still having it? Yeah. Well, you've got biblical names. Can you imagine this name? Not pitied, not loved, Lo Ami, not my people. But we pointed out that the word lo means no. Okay, and you take that off, and all those names have different meanings, you'll see. Okay. So this is the reading from last time. I'm just basically going to spin through it. Lord began to speak to Hosea, and this is a third person, a narrative type of thing. Go take yourself an adulterous right and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery, etc., etc. So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Do you remember, those who were here before, the speculation of what the daughter of Diblaim, what Diblaim means? Okay, some of these words are obscure, and so if you go to the commentaries, you'll have like 4 different analysis of it. But one thread you see in a number of commentaries, it means a double portion of raisin cakes or a double portion of grape cakes. And there are not only a portion, a double portion. And there are some allusions there. If you look in the Song of Solomon, there I believe, comfort me with raisin cakes because I am faint in love. I'm paraphrasing that, but so there are references to some temple pagan worship involving these types of products. So it's both got a sensual connotation, and it both has a kind of a connotation of pagan worship. But whatever it is, there's a double portion of it here, and she's the son of it. So all these words, names have meanings and have significance, and it's in there for a reason. So that's who she is, and she conceived him and bore him a son. Now, then the Lord said, call him Jezreel, which we mentioned before. And then she says, here, Gomer conceived again. Last week we had kind of a difference of opinion in the group as to the significance of that. I think some of the later passages add weight to some of the speculation that when it says Gomer conceived again, it didn't say Gomer bore him a daughter or bore him a son. It says she conceived again, that the second and the third child might not have been his. It's possible. And that would kind of fit the narrative, wouldn't it? That we both hear and that we're about to see. So we don't know, obviously. He doesn't tell us, but it's a speculation. And then the names, not loved or not pitied. And then she weaned Lo-Ruhamah, and she had another son. Again, no direct reference to parentage, who the father is. I think it's interesting that we did talk about this, that the additional detail of weaning the child. So it's kind of a gives some historical, the discussion whether this is purely a vision. John Calvin would say this can't be true. God would have never done this, Or what I think more persuasive to me, that this is an actual story, a living parable back through him. But the fact that, a detail after she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, that, in old days, some of you know what the weaning period, maybe between 18 months and 2 or 3 years, 4 years. 3 years. Some of the ladies are grimacing just thinking about that. But there's a detail that would suggest, there's some reality to this story there. And so they named the 2 children. And these names, not my people and not pitied. So, but this is characteristic of this entire book. You have negative things said, and then we end with this, the last things. They will appoint our leader, they'll come out of the land, they'll be the people of Israel, my people and my loved one. So again, you've got the harsh words and you got a kind of a word of hope just abruptly at the end. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the contrast that we talked about last time between the very harsh, almost unsettling words of God in this book and other portions of the Old Testament, and what we know about God's complete love and mercy and grace in Scripture. And to see it side by side in this book is unsettling. I suspect part of the purpose is to make it unsettling. We called it this incompatible contrast between law and grace in the last class. But for Hosea, it would be a contrast really between the covenants of God in some ways. So, the number of covenants in the Bible, when I look it up, different people say 6, 7, 8, 5, 4. But these are a list here. And does anybody know, start with the Abrahamic covenant, that's most familiar to people. And for those of you that know or can read that fine print, tell me what the Abrahamic covenant is. Excuse me? Descendants, right. Land and descendants. And what do the people have to do? Does Abraham have to do anything in response to that? No. Yeah, it's an unconditional covenant. It's a unilateral, unconditional covenant promise. Okay. Now, if you go on down and you get to the covenant given to the Mosaic covenant, and we could have put under that actually a few years later the Levitical laws, what you read in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. We could have included that as well, kind of as a subsection under that. Now, we're used to seeing an abbreviated form of the Ten Commandments. In fact, I think they're in every state office. I was at the Public Service Commission 2 weeks ago, and they had the Ten Commandments up in the wall. But we used to see them everywhere, aren't we? And let's see here. Sorry. Yeah, the abbreviated Ten Commandments. Okay. Well, there's really, that you don't need they're true, and you don't really need context to understand what they say and what they mean. And true, they're true enough. But we know that there's more to it. We know the context in which they were given. And even actually, if you actually look at Exodus, our abbreviated form doesn't have some of the other language that accompanies the Ten Commandments. For example, I just pulled you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. So, that. Consequence for it. Honor your father and mother so you may live long in the land the Lord God is giving you. Honor your parents or you're not going to live long in the land the Lord is giving you. Those are the consequences. Now, on some of the more detailed curses and blessings are in the sheet I passed around. I asked you to kind of identify the action and the consequence, good and bad. So if you've done that, could somebody just throw them out? Give me some examples.
If you obey me, I will bless you with good weather.
Okay. Good weather, crops will grow, and all that.
If you don't, I will bring sudden terror, wasting diseases, and fever to destroy your sight and sap your strength.
Wow. Any others?
If you still don't listen to me, you'll eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters, and it only gets happier.
Can you imagine? I mean, just that imagery. Even if it's just imagery, it's unbelievably awful. So these are conditional covenants, aren't they? You do this, I do this. There are two parties to the covenants. And that's different from the Abrahamic covenant. It's also different from the Davidic covenant. Does anybody know what the Davidic covenant is? You should. Yes, ever. And it was the line of Jesus. And that's why we spent the beginning of the New Testament all this time tying Jesus to David because of that promise. That's another unilateral promise. Unlike these other covenants, the Mosaic covenant and all the rules that you read there. So you've got this tension between the conditional promises of God and the unconditional promises of God. We called it law and grace before, but that's essentially what it is. And that's playing out in literature in this book. It's almost playing out in every other paragraph, isn't it? Yeah. But the key thing, and Hosea makes this clear, as other parts of Scripture, is that as that plays out, love always wins. As it plays out, love always prevails at the end. Now that doesn't mean on the conditional covenant that there are not consequences. There are earthly consequences, and but at the end, God's love always prevails because that is who He is. God is love. That is His character, and we know that. Now that's interesting to me for the marriage metaphor here. Because we know, and this is why I wish we had nobody with a collar on in this room. Because I'm going to get, because I do want input on this, but the way I understand marriage is that it is both a sacrament with obligations to God going upward, but also a horizontal covenant with your wife. So you see kind of a parallel here to these type of covenants. You have a conditional covenant with your spouse. In addition to the unilateral covenant, your relationship with God there at the marriage altar. And we know, because somebody's asked me this in conjunction with this lesson. He said, are we required to go marry a prostitute, or an unfaithful husband, chronically unfaithful husband? Is this the path that everyone has to follow in a marriage? But we know, I think we know, that the human side of the covenant here, the conditional covenant in marriage, can be irretrievably broken. And those of you that have gone through that know how terribly awful that can be. And one of the things of this story is it kind of evokes that, I think, in you. You have some of those emotions now. So the human side of things can be broken. That doesn't mean God's side God abandons you. Doesn't mean the mercy's not available for both parties in the relationship eternally. It doesn't mean that God doesn't hate divorce and doesn't want all relationships to be resolved. But it is a recognition that any human covenant can be broken. And the consequences of disobedience just play out during Hosea, don't they? So, have I gotten that right?
My only qualification would be that I don't think Hosea is intended to be a model for us of sacramental marriage. Like I said, I think that when we try to find our marriages in Hosea, we're probably asking the book to do something that it's not intending to do. I think it's supposed to be that metaphor for the relationship between Israel and their God. So,
I suspect if he presented himself here, you would have some extra counseling or something before the marriage, probably. Got it. Okay, so that's a pretty good lead-in to the pursuit of other lovers, what we're about to read here today, because I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood that we had the two different types of covenants, the tension, how that plays out in Hosea's writing, and how that might apply within the relationship himself. So I'm just going to read it up on screen. I don't know if you've got your Bibles, you can follow above. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Now understand, we've gone from the third person to the first person, haven't we? So this is Hosea speaking presumably to his children. Okay? Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. Those words would be divorce words, wouldn't they? Yeah. So we were talking about before, that covenantal relationship there has been broken, presumably. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts. Otherwise I will strip her naked and make her as bare as on the day she was born. I will make her like a desert, turn her into a parched land, and slay her with thirst. I will not show my love to her children, because they are the children of adultery. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. Remember our earlier comment? She said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. Therefore I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first. For them I was better off than now. She has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine, and the oil, who lavished her with the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen, intended to cover her naked body. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. No one will take her out of my hands. I will stop all of her celebrations, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days, all of her appointed festivals. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were pay from her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers. but me she forgot, declares the Lord. Wow. Tough talk, isn't it? Yes. Speak up.
So it's very clearly like God talking about the bigger picture.
The bigger picture of Israel? Yeah, yeah. And you see allusions to Israel here, don't you? Yeah, all through it. When we get into the next chapter, 3, we kind of return to more of a focused discussion of Gomer and his wife with impact on Israel. But here you see this mixed together absolutely. And so, first question for the group is, at the beginning, rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she's not my wife, and I'm not her husband. That seems like a plea to me, doesn't it? And why do you think he's making this as a plea?
I think because he doesn't want his children following her path. And if they rebuke her, then they are turning away from the adultery of paganism.
Anybody else?
The ESV actually translates the rebuke as plead, as if there's a call for a hope for repentance, like this, like a legal proceeding. That there's a chance that maybe this could be saved.
We'll see in chapter 4, when he's addressing Israel pretty clearly, without the metaphor of his wife, that it's almost like a legal indictment against Israel. He sets it out. That's kind of the way he writes here in a number of ways, and sets out the charge, and then he discusses a little bit what the mitigating circumstances or the remedies might be. Go ahead.
One reason for divorce, basically, is that Israel's been unfaithful.
Yes, and not just divorce. I mean, what was what's the Levitical punishment for adultery? Stoning. Yeah, that's what we talked about it. Go ahead.
Maybe on a simple level, Gomer and Hosea are not in a good relationship right now, so she's not listening to a word he says. So he's like, you go talk to your mom. I mean, she's not listening to me. I mean, seriously.
Yeah. Well, that would kind of comport a little bit with what she's going to be reading toward the end of this. Actually, a lot of speculation, like where is Gomer physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually during all this?
What a thing to ask your child to do, though. Go tell your mom that if she doesn't stop flying, I'm gonna. I think that it really makes it quite brutal to think about.
Yeah.
Very real. Yeah.
Well, most of what he does in this chapter 2 is brutal. So I'm thinking that's just setting it up. He starts at the top and just, does
Yes.
all
But if it's like Father Andrew described, like sort of like there's a chance, well, you can't heal this relationship unless you identify where you've gone astray, right? So you've got to identify her and Israel for what they are. And all
Got to identify the
like
problem.
Like the indictment, here it is, right? If you're not honest, I think it's brutally honest, is because you can't fix it if you don't own it. Yeah.
Truth and reconciliation.
We have a couple professional counselors here. I mean, has that been your experience? You have to identify the problem before you can move on, or?
Yeah, but it feels really cruel to me to put the children in that position. But that's just my reaction.
Yeah, we don't know how old the children would be here. So we can't answer those questions. It's shocking, isn't it?
It's shocking.
We also, the culture of the day would have been a little bit different. You wouldn't have had probably all the sensitivity that we have had here. And you kind of suspect, one thing that we, it's a sin. I've decided it's a sin. But on social media, We are members, we have watched, there's something called Montgomery Uncut, which is an unfiltered, every crime that happens in Montgomery, it's on that page before it gets to the police blotter. And people are taking pictures and they're telling about it. So we knew about all the shootings, we know everything. And somebody's obviously making money off of the page, you know. But what is, in response to the latest shooting or robbery or something, or school event, what we see is it's revealing is the profanity and the baseness of the dialogue. Did you see? You know, you may see an event that's centered around a fight and a shooting, and or a fight in a more dangerous part of town, and the children are just right there. They're just there watching. So, you know, this is a primitive, dangerous, relative time. These kids are living in a very primitive time. And so these kids have probably already seen it, don't you think? And they probably already heard it. And so what's shocking to us about going home to our children and, you know, telling their child that their mother is doing all this bad stuff, my guess is they would have known it, you know, probably, context, but obviously we don't know. So, any other thoughts about that? Okay. What about this? I will not show love to her children because they are the children of adultery. Is that shocking to you?
Well, it's sad, but it doesn't that, Mark, go back to the comment earlier that perhaps they were not his children?
Good. Yeah. The fact that he took them in before, you know, would suggest, I think it shows some mercy on his part. And there's no evidence later in the passage that he didn't keep them. In fact, we see their name changes, doesn't it? But yeah, you know, there are different ways of viewing this, I think, but I kind of view it, you know, this is kind of this is one of those natural consequences, you know, the conditional love that plays out, you know, that thank the Lord we have mercy and grace in the fulfillment of Jesus Christ on this, so everyone can be loved, irrespective of what we know this to be. In the end, love always wins through this. We see this in this passage. We're just not there yet. So God's just telling us this jarring consequence, which we know exists when these types of things.
Very human.
It's very human.
Every time
You're
I
right.
see those kids, it would remind them.
Okay, the next, Oliver Haynes. Every time I have eaten with the Hayneses, and Oliver's asked to do the blessing, he will always, any blessing, I think any Bible study we've had, anything, he will always ask God to put a hedge of protection around his family, doesn't he? So I called Oliver. Yeah, put a hedge of protection around his family. So I called Oliver when I saw this. I said, Oliver, tell me, did you have some derivation from you see the hedge here, the reference? I'll block her path with thorn bushes, hedge. He said, no, it had no connection to any of that. But I've always viewed a hedge of protection as keeping the enemy from the outside. And I think that's what we would pray from, isn't it? This is a different type of hedge, isn't it? What is this doing? Yeah, keeps her away from it to some extent. So, and I thought I had, so we really do see two types of punishment, don't we? I'm going to go back to, see if I have, I think I have it here somewhere in this. Yes, read this. Sometimes the real punishment God gives in sin is standing back and allow us to choose it in our own free will, okay? This is the other side. Allowing us to feel what happens when we are on our own, allowing us to feel the brokenness and pain of our decision to live apart from Him. So that's one side, letting natural consequences Okay? Mark, if you're going to be that late for supper, it's going to be cold. Okay? We all natural consequences, you know. And now we have over here, although, now he allows the consequences in some circumstances, yet he hedges us from fatal consequences of our behavior in other circumstances. This hedges the thorns that he takes. So I want to ask you, I want examples of both. Can anybody think of an example where you really wanted to do something? We're going back to, let's do the hedge first. Something you really wanted to do. You thought it was your heart's desire, your ambition, and you were continually frustrated in getting it done. And you did get it done. You didn't accomplish it. You didn't go that place. You didn't have that relationship, something. And then later in life, you look back and said it was the Lord protecting you from bad consequences. Anybody have that in your life?
I'm sure I do, but the song I think of Garth Brooks' song about thank God for unanswered prayers.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
That's what that reminds me of.
Anybody else? In a path that you thought you were going to go on and it was out there and you just seemed so unfair?
Yeah, I remember a girlfriend way back. Thank the Lord.
Oh, wow. Wow. That did work out. Yeah. Descendants like the stars in the skies, Judge.
I think it's easy to see as a parent, like in our parenting our children, there's things they want to do. So you remember those days, you know.
Yeah.
You jump up and do the things they want to do, hold on to the leash. And now, like Dawson, you can look back and say, Mom, thank you for not letting me do that. That's easy for me to remember.
I've told this story to some of you, but when I moved to Montgomery after law school, and I'm living on College Street, and with a classmate, and it was that time between you take the bar and the results come in, and we're working, and we're playing a lot, okay? And we were in a social organization that was co-sponsoring a band party somewhere. I didn't have a date, wasn't going out, you know, I had no girlfriend or anything like that. And I had an intermediary who I knew in town, and she said, you know, you really, you go anybody to this party, what about, you should go with Eloise Compton. She's perfect for you, and she's totally unattached. I've talked to her. She's looking for somebody to go to this party with, and you can do it. And I said, well, you know, if she's interested, sure. And she said, don't worry about it. Consider it done. That's what she said, you know. And so I see the next week we're getting close to the party, and I see her, and she seems to be kind of avoiding the conversation with me, the intermediary. And I asked her, you know, I finally called her, and I said, you know, what's the story? You have her number? Should I go? And she said, you know, Mark, I'm not sure she's the right person for you. I'm just not, you know, maybe there's somebody else, and there are plenty of other people. There's this person, and I'm slow, but about 2 minutes into the call, I realized as pastorally as she could, she was telling me Eloise didn't want to go with me. And Eloise has her own version of that. But so you had to go to Plan B. Plan B, yeah. But it worked out, like you're. But I remember though that there was no covenant there, was there? I mean, I didn't even talk to her directly, you know. So there was no covenant. There were no mutual responsibilities to be breached. But even with that superficial one phone call, thought I would go on with a pretty girl to the. I remember getting my ego knocked down a little bit, just a little bit, painful, you know. So, you know, you take that to the extreme of a marriage, and I see how profound this story is and why God's using it for, to convey this message. I'm not sure that has anything to do with hedge protection, although Eloise may have said, I should have kept the hedge up, you know. So let's go to the other side, because we have that example. He says doing the hedge, and then the same chapter, he's saying this, isn't he? He's going to let you run and let the ruin result in some areas of your life. So I want to flip it. Anybody have example, either parenting or your own parents or in your own life, where somebody said, the only way you're going to learn the lesson is to play out the consequences of your action? It's not Andrew.
No.
Okay.
For restraining order on.
Oh.
Just like, but it was just say, okay, Lord, I know that you, don't know that I'm getting old here. My sister is moving ahead very quickly, and, it's okay, I'll just get on this thing. And, it was the worst thing that I've ever done. It was just the most awful experience. And, that's what I feel like, is, oh Lord, I'm so sorry, if I had just waited, I could have had Andrew without all of that drama before. So, but I do, it was me saying, okay, God, I know that I've asked you for this, and I know that I've given this to you, but. Not really. Yeah, let me just. Run ahead.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
saved me, he did, I mean, he spared me, and really, in so many ways, I learned a lot, but I also learned that I would so much rather be alone with God where he wants me than trying to manipulate
Yeah.
my life into what I thought I wanted.
Yeah.
And until I really got to that point, then Andrew showed up. But
Yeah. You're going to see some of that in Christy's reading about scared to be alone or invisible. Anybody else? Anybody with your children? No? Everybody's laughing. Yeah. Yeah.
That is the best teaching tool, I mean, that is
Yeah.
discipline, I mean,
yeah, that's how you potty train kids.
you gotta figure it out, exactly.
You
I
gotta-
mean, to that basic of a thing, exactly.
Live in wet
That's
pants.
what Dr.
Yeah.
Campbell said, you just like, oh, I'm so
This
sorry,
is
how do you get that
uncomfortable.
cleaned up? And
Oh, really?
You let them feel uncomfortable in their wet underwear.
Yeah.
Who knew?
I wasn't an active participant in that. Yeah. So, yeah. But to go back to go back to the hymn.
Here's Oliver's head right here. Right?
Yes, this is Oliver's hedge, right here. And interesting, you hem me in from behind and before, all around me in the psalm. Such knowledge, which Hosea says is the key, and that really means knowing God. It's not academic knowledge, it's knowing God, which we know through Christ, is the key to that. Too lofty for David to obtain. So, we've got about 8 minutes, I think. I don't want anybody to get it down. We're going to go next into, who's got a card here? Next reading is 3, Hosea 2:14-23. It gets better. These are words of pursuit and alluring people and bringing them out of the difficulty they're in by every means possible, and beginning the process of restoration. A promise of that. Now it's going to get worse before it gets better in these 3 chapters, but it's worth. Before we get there, though, we're going to talk a little bit about Gomer, and this is I think chapter 7 in a book by Jerry Campbell, and it's really kind of a play that plays out in 13 chapters, I believe. And actually, she's not the only person that's done this. This is speculation about who Gomer is, how she got where she is, and this particular person to kind of bring you up to where Christy is, so speak, is that she assumes that Gomer was born to a mother that was actually working at a temple. And her dad, Diblium, may have been a visitor to that temple. And that she was actually at a young age kind of enticed to participate in some of the dances, which increasingly became sensual. And at some point in time, an older man took her under his hand and said he would protect her and help her and pushed her along this path. Eloise, you had said something when you were in Greece about the impact of the older men. Do you remember people not leaving their where? Yeah.
That we were talking to some people, some women that had been rescued out of trafficking, and one of the ladies was a prostitute who said that she had friends, women who were 80 years old that could not leave that business because that's where they felt beautiful. People told them they were beautiful, and it made them feel so, that's the only place they could feel wanted and loved. 80
Wow.
years old.
Unbelievable.
They would still be in that, that need.
So with that lead up, now she's gone through that, but Hosea marries her, at God's command, and she pulls her into a household which she's never experienced before. She is delighted for that, and she writes about being delighted. She has their child, but then her past continues to talk to her. Not happy being alone, perhaps. Hosea travels a lot. It's a bad thing about being a prophet. And so she has begun to wonder, first mentally and then physically. And she's not of one mind. And so we're going to end with this reading, and we'll come back again for the next class. Right ahead. Why don't you come up here so I can hear you?
Because I have such a soft voice.
I'm nothing. The sun is almost up, and there's so much to do. It seems as though no matter how early I start, the day is never long enough. I get up earlier and earlier just to get some things done before the kids awake. I feel so angry. Hey, here's an idea. Why don't I just try not going to bed at all? Huh, would that work for everybody? I'm sorry. It sounds as though I'm complaining, and I don't mean to complain. After all, this is what I wanted from my life, right? To become a wife and a mother. They say that watching my children grow and be happy and healthy, well, that should be enough thanks for all I do, but it isn't. No one appreciates me. Oh, here's a good one. Children are a reward from the Lord, which just rewards me with more work, which makes me just want to scream sometimes. What about me, huh? What about a little time for myself? All day long I have duties and responsibilities, people pulling at me, Mommy, Mommy, and I never get to do what I want to do. I never get to go where I want to go. It's as though no one even sees me anymore. I'm invisible. I need something. I need to feel appreciated. Would anyone say thank you to me just once in a while? I guess they appreciate me when I feed them, but is that enough? God knows I want it to be enough. I just don't know what to do anymore. My life needs meaning and purpose. Don't get me wrong, Hosea, he's a great husband, but it was different in the beginning. I got more attention when I strayed away. I used to be pretty. Did you know that? At one time I had spa jewelry and beautiful clothes. It may be hard to picture this, but there was a time when I could turn a lot of heads. But, well, look at me now. I don't know what to do to feel happy anymore. God help me. I don't know anything anymore. Startled out of my thoughts by the baby's cry, I feel an overwhelming urge to run. Just leave. No one will care. I'm between comforting my child and walking away. I feel nothing. As though in a dream, outside of myself, I walk out the door and down the darkened street, not knowing where I'm going. I don't have a cloak, but I don't even care. Suddenly a figure in the shadows near the olive trees calls out to me, but I can barely hear him. What did he say? Again, a raspy whisper in the wind. I've been waiting for you. Who are you? My thoughts are so jumbled. Nothing makes sense. The figure is in front of me, blocking me, reaching for me. I've never forgotten you, Gomer. I have been waiting for you to come to me. Don't you want to feel pretty again, Gomer? He leads me behind the stone wall. He touches me, but I feel nothing. I am nothing.
Wow.